Okay. All right. So this is kind of our typical yearly OpStats overview. I know some of you have been to this before, and we have several new people. So we're going to kind of go through this year's report and talk about any changes, and then just kind of give you an overview, a live demo of it. And then we'll introduce, I guess I should say, the FY23 report. And if you have questions at any time throughout the webinar, just either throw them in the chat, and Jonah, you can let me know if any come through the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask as we go. So if you could try and keep yourself muted when you're not asking questions, though, that would be great, especially for the recording. So if there aren't any questions at the moment, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like a couple people are still rolling in. Okay, so the deadlines, these haven't changed. So these are the same deadlines that you have had in the past. Your first quarter OpStats will be due October 31st, second quarter, January 31st, third quarter, April 30th, and your fourth quarter, which you'll be working on now, will be due August 31st. So you get that extra month to work on the financial part of the OpStats report. So the changes in this year's report. So last year, we introduced the CARES line items, and we have a couple additional emergency funds related to COVID, and those are CRISA funds and ARPA funds. And so those two line items have been added to this year's report. So those are the big changes this year. Actually, I think they're the only changes to the FY22 report. So if you've gotten those funds by each of those grants, you'll need to make sure you split those out in the OpStats report. Jonah, if you could, towards the end of the session, throw those updated reports in the chat for people to download if they didn't get those from IMD's website yet. So those are the changes to the current year's report. We don't need to go over that. So the big thing that you need to be aware of is anytime you download this, the OpStats report is a macro-enabled spreadsheet. The file extension must be XLSM, and you need to make sure you save it that way to ensure that the OpStats report works correctly. And usually when you open this report for the first time, when you download a new version and open it, you'll be asked to enable content. And you want to make sure you press this button to enable the macros that ensures that the OpStats report works correctly. And I'll explain where those macros kind of come into play momentarily. On the overview tab, so this hasn't changed. You've got to choose your grantee legal name and enter your contact information. The person filling this out, or who we should go to if we have questions, would probably be the preferable contact person, just so that if we have to follow up with any questions or issues that we find, we get to the right person. So you fill that out there, and then select your service area. So whether you're a single county or a multi-county service area, and if you're a regional system, just list the counties that you serve. The FY22 report is in this red color. We do change each year so that we can differentiate any new information that may have been incorporated into the current year's OpStats report. So if you are filling out the OpStats, make sure you do have the red version. So when it comes to the macros, there's an operating mode section. And in order to enter in your service and financial data by the modes, you need to make sure that you check the boxes for the modes that you operate. So here in this example, we have checked the demand response directly operated and the demand response purchase transportation checkboxes. And you see the corresponding cells on the weekday tab unlocked. So if you're trying to enter data into an uncolored cell and it's telling you that it's password protected, you don't need a password. You just need to make sure you go back to the overview tab and check the boxes in the operating modes that you do operate. If you do operate fixed routes, there's a drop-down box that will open up and just asks you to fill out or enter whether you operate a fixed route, a deviated fixed route, or both. And here's what it looks like on the finance tab. So again, with the operating modes of DRDO and DRPT checked, the columns, the financial columns corresponding to those two modes will become unlocked as well. And we'll see this when we get to a live demo of the FY22 report. With regards to rope revenues, so make sure that you're not reporting your actual disbursement. So I know a lot of times you are dispersed a certain amount and you may not utilize all those funds during the fiscal year. And in the past, those rolled over. I think now you have to send those back. So you only want to report the revenues that you received that were used to pay for expenses incurred during the fiscal year. So any unexpended funds should be removed from the amount that you're reporting on the rope line item in the state revenue section. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the changes to this year's report are only in the finance tab. And so we have 3 emergency fund line items for 5307, 3 for 5310, and 3 for 5311. And each of those are repeated for the CARES, CRISA, and ARP funds. So again, make sure that you're reporting those, splitting those out on this OpStats reports so that we can report those correctly to NTD. I'm sure they'll be asking for these separately to make sure that everything's lining up correctly. Just a quick note, let's see. So DHHS funding is other state. Is that right, Jonah? Did I get that right? I know that was, so that should really be state funds, other state.
Yeah, we're putting it into that category this year.
Yeah. So if you still have some funds, I guess those funds were extended through December of last year. Is that right? So some of you may have had some of those funds that you need to report. So yeah, add those in as other state and just describe what you're using there so we can describe that. When it comes to your splits, splitting out your 5311, 5339, or 5307, just recall that these are the splits that you'll use. For admin, 5311 admin, you'll have 80% of it federal, 5% of it state, and then 15% local. For 5311 capital, it's an 80-10-10 split. And for 5311 operating, it's a 50-50 split. So 50% federal and 50% local. For 5339, it's just like 5311, it's an 80-10-10 split. And it's always, I know a lot of you assume that you've been using 5311, so make sure that you're filling those out on the appropriate lines because that can change depending on where the money's available for your specific system. And for 5307, your capital is an 80-20 split, 80% federal, 0% state, and 20% local. If you did purchase ADA capital with 5307 funds, you can get 90% federal and 10% local. And then for operating, it's also a 50% federal, 50% local match. So here's just a quick example. I think EBS does a pretty good job of splitting those out for you, but just make sure that you're splitting those out. We still do see some cases where you're combining your federal and state into the federal section or the state, and so you want to make sure that you're getting those split out correctly. So for example, 5311, your grant revenues will be federal plus state of 85%. And so if your grant is $100,000, you want to divide 100,000 by 0.85 to get the total amount of 117,647. And then you want to calculate your federal share, which is 80% of that. Your state share is 5%, and your local share will be 15%. Any questions on this calculation? Okay.
Jeremy, April had a question about the rope reports.
Sure.
Specifically around if you've used all of your disbursement, how would you report that?
Okay. Yeah. So again, so April, just to clarify, did you use all your disbursements in FY22, or did you have some funds in FY21 that you carried over? So you want to report the amount of rope that you used in FY22 for expenses incurred in FY22. So if you were allocated $100,000 for FY22 and that's the full amount you used, then you would report 100,000 as your rope revenues on the OpStats report. If you were allocated 100,000 and you only used 90,000, then you would use the 90,000 as the rope revenues. If you carried over any funds, I don't remember if there's any 21 funds carried over into FY22, but if you did carry over any 21 funds and expended those in FY22 plus FY22 funds, then you want to report the total amount that you expended. And Randy, if you exceeded rope disbursement, you technically can't exceed rope disbursement. Anything above what you were allocated would be considered a local revenue. Use local funds to provide those services. So if you did exceed it, then you would want to report the full disbursement for FY22. Does that answer April and Randy's questions? Anybody else have questions about that? Okay, if you do, let me know. And after this webinar, if you have questions, follow up, feel free to follow up either with myself or Jonah. Okay, the next tab, the next section is the annual statistics. Just a couple notes about this one. You want to make sure you choose how you're performing your maintenance, whether you're doing that in-house, whether you contract that with an outside vendor, or both. And so there's a drop-down box here where you can choose how your maintenance, how your vehicles are maintained. And if you do it in-house or use a county garage, then that would be considered as in-house. So whether you do it yourself or use a county garage, that would be considered as in-house. And then you want to make sure that you let us know whether you own that facility or not. So both of these cells are purposefully left blank. So if you do your maintenance in-house, please enter 1 in the number owned and 0 on the lease. Or if you do contract those out, just enter 0 in both of those so that we know that you filled those out. Okay. The next part of the annual statistics tab is your safety statistics. So we have 3 types of safety statistics that we have to report to NTD. And those are called NTD events, NTD fatalities, and NTD injuries. And you can see these blue hyperlinks. So if you want to clarify exactly what constitutes as an NTD event, you can click on that hyperlink. It'll take you to the definitions tab and then spell out what should be considered as an event, a fatality, or an injury. And similar to the maintenance information, these are left blank. So if you didn't have any of these 3 categories and any of these three NTD reportable events, please enter 0s into those cells. If you did have multiple events or more than one event, 1 or more, please enter the number of each. So if you had 2 events and 3 injuries, you want to make sure that you enter 2 in the events and then 3 in the injuries. Okay, so here is just a breakdown of the 3 categories. So NTD events are any event involving the operation of a transit system. If as a result, 1 or more of the following occurs. So it's got to be at least 1 of these to be considered as an NTD event. If an individual dies either at the time of the event or within 30 days of the event, If there's an injury requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene for one or more persons. If there's a collision, personal casualty, or fire, and it causes property damages in excess of $25,000. If there's a collision involving the transit vehicles that require towing away from the scene for either a transit road vehicle or a non-transit vehicle, or if there's an evacuation due to life safety reasons. So if any one of those things occurs, then you want to report that as an NTD event. So that threshold's slightly, or not slightly, but it's pretty different from what we consider as an incident for IMD's reporting purposes and what you report in EAM, especially the $25,000 threshold. So a lot of times you'll have to report any kind of incident that occurs for EAM, but it might not meet that threshold for NTD. So make sure you look through these events and see if it meets one of these parameters. For NTD fatalities, this one's pretty clear. So if there's a fatality, either at the scene or within 30 days, you report the number of those. And then for injuries, the key part here is that if somebody needs to be immediately driven away from the scene for medical attention, then that would be considered as an injury. I think if they're just attended to there and then they're free to go, then you wouldn't consider that as an injury. So they would need to be taken, transported for immediate medical attention. Related to the COVID CARES funds, so we do have there could be some incidental services that you have provided using those funds. So if you do have that information, please enter your miles, your hours, and then a description. So this has changed. Last year, this was just CARES because those were the only emergency funds that we had. But now that you have ARPA and CRISA funds, please add in that information as well as part of your miles, hours, and then just provide a description of those services. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit earlier, but you are eligible only to enter data into the colored cells. So FY22 is red. FY23 will be a different color, which we'll see shortly. You want to make sure that you're reporting all of your expenses and revenues. So this has changed. It's been like this for a couple of years now, but you're not required to match your revenues with your expenses. So if you have a surplus or a deficit, that's fine. Go ahead and report it that way, and we'll address it on our end accordingly. So it's not required anymore to match those together, but you want to make sure that you are reporting all expenses, not just grant paid expenses. For the most part, I think this is pretty much the case across the board. NTD has a different definition for contract revenue than what we consider or call contract revenue. So for the most part, everybody should report what we call contract revenue as other directly generated funds. And the difference between the two is if your revenues, your contract revenue covers the full cost of service, then you would report that as contract revenue. And to cover the full cost, they have to include admin, operating, and capital. And I think in the majority of cases, if not everybody, there is some sort of subsidy that is being applied, whether it's 5311 or CARES or any other grants to subsidize those rates that you're charging your third-party agencies. So generally, those should be reported as other directly generated funds. So Carol's asking about your managed care payments for motive care. Yes, those would be reported, but those are Medicaid payments. I know that's not directly from Medicaid, but it's as a part of providing Medicaid services. So I would report that separately. There is a line item for Medicaid revenue. So I would include that with your funds that you receive directly right now through DSS. And then the last thing is some of you might get capital assistance or 5310 funds, and you've chosen to use those for operating, such as a mobility manager. So this has been done several years ago. But there is a column now that you can enter this in the admin and operating column, whereas several years ago it was just in the capital. So if you do have mobility manager funds and you're getting those, you want to make sure you add those to the admin operating and not the capital section. Okay, NCD validation. So this is a big part that happens behind the scenes. Most of you are not aware of what goes on there. But our reports, the state needs to report all of our to NCD, everybody by October 31st. So once we get the OpStats reports from you guys, we do a pretty big validation process. We go back and compare what you report on your OpStats against your grant claims percentages and make sure that everything got split out correctly. We also just kind of check through your service data, make sure that there aren't any, extra digits in your miles or hours or trips and things like that. And then once we've kind of verified all that information, we import that data into NTD's database, and they will run a verification on their end. What they're looking for is how does the information that you reported this year compare to last year or previous years? And if things are outside of what they expect them to be, they will flag it and ask us for an explanation of why there was a greater than expected difference. And usually that difference is about 10%. So if it's outside there, they'll flag it. And in a lot of cases, we can usually figure out why, since we've got these broken down pretty detailed, especially in your operating and admin, we can go through and see, did you have an increase in fuel? Did you have an increase in operator expenses, maintenance, things like that? So we might be able to explain why there was a greater than expected difference. In some cases, we may not. So we'll have to reach back out to you and just kind of work with you to figure out what may have happened. Some explanations for this could be that you added a removed service, you gained or lost a sponsor and agency, higher fuel maintenance costs, increase in driver salaries, things like that. And I think for the most part, everybody's kind of aware of this process now, but it is something that we have to do, and it does take a while. So we might reach back out at some point and just kind of touch base with you to see what may have caused these changes from year to year. Okay, so Carol's clarifying broker revenue should go into Medicaid revenue. Some passengers tell us that brokers are taking them other places, and when their allowable number of trips are depleted, they call us to see if we can assist them. So I guess to clarify your clarifying question, Carol. So if the trip is coming from the broker, then it should be reported as a Medicaid. Now, this is part of this kind of change to this holistic whole care idea, where it's not necessarily just an appointment to the doctor, but it's doing other things to make sure they get into the grocery store. But if it's coming through the broker, it's a Medicaid trip. It's not emergency Medicaid transportation. If their allowable number of trips has been depleted and they're calling you and you're choosing to provide those services and using your rope funds, then those trips that you're providing directly with the client would go under your rope revenue. So the revenues there would be used, not Medicaid. So whatever comes from the brokers would go under Medicaid. And if you have clients that can't go through the brokers anymore and you're using your local funds or other funds, then they would be reported to that appropriate source. Is that clear, Carol?
Well, it is and it isn't, because sometimes there are Medicare people that are riding. So why would I just want to make sure I got it right? I did have some questions when you said something about contract revenue, that it would go under. I contract with the local DSS, not just for Medicaid, senior services, and I've always used that for contract revenue. Are you saying that's not contract revenue?
If it covers the full cost of service, it would be contract revenue. Otherwise, technically other directly generated funds. So. Oh,
okay.
So and that's an NTD. So I know you report on your own behalf for NTD. So
yes.
And I have a difference of opinion on what other directly generated funds are than NTD does. But technically speaking, if it's subsidized, if it's not covering the full cost of service, then it should be other directly generated funds.
Okay, I got that. But do we have anything, and I don't mean to get picky, but where would we find verbiage from NCDOT that says that the brokers that we have a contract with should go under Medicaid transportation in case something happens and it's really not Medicaid transportation?
Well, I mean, I'm not aware of brokers that are providing, I guess you said Medicare, right?
Yep.
I mean, other than that, it's non-emergency medical transportation.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're okay by moving those from contract, well, they really don't pay for the whole trip, but contract revenue to Medicaid transportation in the operational, in the OpStats report. Is that what you told us to do?
Yes. Yeah. If it's
Okay.
coming from the broker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so just to continue on, so if you did have some changes in the current year that are causing your service to drop or increase more than expected, or your financial information, we did add at the end of the annual statistics tab, there's a section where you can kind of describe what happened during the year to cause those larger than expected changes. So if you enter this information here, we'll try and remember to review this and look at that and see if that helps us answer these questions if NTD flags anything when we import your data. So this will be on there, and I'll show you when we get to the live demo where that is. Okay, and then there's a quick snapshot of the FY23, so we'll get there in a second. So any questions before I get to a live demo of the FY22? Any questions on up to this point? Where would we see report breakdowns? I'm not sure what you're asking, Carol.
Well, normally in past years, maybe it wasn't last year, I don't know, that we've had to put down the number of breakdowns that we had during service if it caused an interruption of service. So that's not, we don't need to put that in the OpStats report anymore. Okay, that's fine.
No, I don't think that's ever been in the, I don't think we've ever asked for breakdowns in the OpStats. I mean, we ask for incidents, NTD events, fatalities, and injuries, but no service breakdowns.
Okay. That sounds great. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
I mean, that could be an NTD or an NCDOT thing. That's just not an NTD thing. It's not an OpStats thing.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to go do a quick demo. So I think everybody should be able to see my Excel spreadsheet. It's got the instructions tab. Is that right? Can somebody verify that for me, please?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got our instructions tab here. Just kind of gives you an overview of what's contained in this document. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to contact myself or Jonah, and we've been more than happy to help you. So unfortunately, this does not have the enable editing button on here. So if you do come into this screen, you can go to your file tab, and you can go in the info section. If it's not been enabled, there'll be a section that asks you to enable editing. And since this has already been enabled, it doesn't ask us that. So again, just make sure that you do enable editing. And if you check these boxes and nothing happens, you know that something happened and it didn't work. So on the overview tab, you're just going to click the drop down, find your system, and then fill out this information. And when you get to the operating modes, so right now you can see This is the wrong mode. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So that's the microtransit one that only those systems have to worry about for FY22. So currently, if you go into your weekday tab, the only colored cells will be your operating days, and you can enter your operating days into those cells. If you're trying to enter data into one of these white cells, this is where you'll get a message asking you to unprotect that it's protected and you need a password, right? So we don't need a password there. What you need to do is go back to the overview tab, check your box, and then it will unlock those cells. So whichever modes you operate, if you do all four, you can check those boxes, and it will open up the corresponding cells on your weekday tab, your Saturday tab, your Sunday tab, and your finance tab. So again, if you're getting a message, an error message that tells you it's password protected, it just means you're trying to enter data into a cell that's currently locked, and to unlock it, just go back and check your operating modes. If you check these boxes and it doesn't unlock those cells, that means that it's not been enabled, or it got saved as a non-macro enabled file. So it's a .xlsx or a .xls. So again, be careful about the extension that you've got the file saved as. So once you unlock those cells, you can go ahead and enter your data into your weekday tabs, Saturday and Sunday, your service data. So you enter your miles, your hours, your miles, and then your passenger trips by type. On the overview tab, the last things are, what operating hours you have. If you have a contractor for your services, who is that contractor, and what are the begin and end dates of the contract. If you do provide service outside of your main county, so if you go out of county or across multiple counties, just check this box and then let us know which counties you do provide service to. And if you do coordinate with other community transportation systems, check this box and again, let us know who you're coordinating with. So once you get your service data entered, weekday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's a weekly totals tab. It's always a good idea to check this tab. And usually I look at the quarterly data and the year to date and just make sure that you're kind of seeing from quarter to quarter that the data is pretty consistent. If you added an extra digit in your hours and miles or trips, that should be flagged pretty clearly in your quarterly data. It doesn't always indicate that there isn't an issue there, but that's a good place to start. The other place are these dashboards, which gives you just kind of a graphical representation of the OpStats. And anywhere you're seeing any big peaks or valleys might indicate that there was a data entry error. So these are good ways to just kind of verify that what you've entered into the service tabs were correct. And for your finance tabs, this is essentially the same, except for, as I mentioned earlier, the CARES funds that are the emergency funds. And we've highlighted these just to kind of separate them out from everything else, just to let you know where the new funding sources are. And so we've got those three categories for each: 5307, 5310, and 5311. Other than that, nothing has changed with this finance tab. For your annual statistics, so here is the information I mentioned about your CARES Act, your incidental services. Your maintenance information, here's where you choose whether you have your maintenance done in-house, contracted, or both. And then for your safety statistics, your events, injuries, events, fatalities, and injuries. And again, if you click the hyperlink, it takes it to the definition tab, and we'll give you an explanation of what we're asking for in that specific cell. And you can see that throughout. So not just in that case, but any of these hyperlinks will take you to the section that corresponds to that line item and what you should enter there. So if you have a question, start there. And if this doesn't answer it, then feel free to reach out to myself or Jonah. And then the last part of this tab is where you can kind of let us know if there's any changes that occurred during the past year relative to previous years that impacted your service or financial information. So this is where you can kind of give us some details about that, and we'll try and use that to answer NTD's issues that they may raise if there are any. And then the completion tab. So this just gives you an overview of your expenses by directly operated or purchased transportation, your miles, hours, and trips. You've got some vital signs here. So it looks at your trips per hour by mode. And then also gives you your cost per trip, cost per hour, and cost per mile. And then a couple places where you can kind of take a look at your vital signs, see what you've been doing well, and see where you might be able to improve your performance. And then once you've completed this report, you can print this out. So at least in the past, I don't know if anything's changed with regards to this, but you should be able to print this page out and then just have this PDF signed. If you need multiple documents for each of the signatures, that's been okay in the past. And again, as far as I know, that requirement hasn't changed. So I know where things are kind of opening up a bit, so it might be easier to get everybody to sign the same document. But if that's still difficult, you can print this 3 times and then send it to each of these 3 officials and then submit those 3 PDFs separately along with your Excel spreadsheet. And do make sure that you are uploading your Excel spreadsheet to EBS. And that's just a quick demo of the FY22 OpStats. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. The last thing I want to show you then is just quickly what the FY23 report looks like. And so right now, the big change that we've got here is, I know a lot of people have heard conversations about microtransit, and some of you are actually providing microtransit services. So we want to start collecting this information to kind of see how it's impacting your non-microtransit services. We're assuming as well that National Transit Database or NCD is going to want to know this information to ensure that you're following the rules as a public transit system. So we added a new mode for FY23. So if you provide microtransit services, then this is essentially on-demand service that has a customer-facing application that they can kind of book these trips. Then you will select, if you do it directly operated, that checkbox, or if you use a third party to provide those services, you'll check the MTPT mode. And so for each of those modes, we've now added the service data on weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. And on the finance tab, we've got 2 additional columns under admin operating and capital to capture future microtransit services. So that's really just to let you know what this report will look like for next year. And it's in the green colors. So this is how we'll differentiate from the current year's report. Randy, I think Jonah provided the link in the chat to download from the IMD website.
Also provided a file that you can download directly.
Did you provide the FY23? You wanted the FY23? Or did you just do the FY22?
The FY23 is not up on the website yet, but we have the FY22. I can provide the FY23 directly.
Okay. Yeah, we'll throw that in the chat for you, Randy. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody need any clarifications from questions earlier? Okay, if you do have questions later on, here's our contact information. I think everybody pretty much knows how to get in touch with us, but you can email or call either of us at these email addresses or phone numbers, and we'll be more than happy to help you. If that's it, that's all I have, and you are free to go. So have a great day, everybody.